Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Manifestos are always full of fine-sounding commitments, but as John Major used to say, fine words butter no parsnips. And voters want to know how all those extra billions for schools or the NHS are going to be paid for, which taxes are going up and which benefits are being cut. That means cold, hard numbers, something some politicians seem to have trouble with.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
How much will they cost?
It will cost.
Where will the extra 8 billion come from?
Andrew, what we have done, if you look at our record, is shown that we can put record sums of money into the National Health Service at the same time as we're ensuring that we're building that strong economy. And that's what we'll do for the future.
What is Britain's deficit at the moment, Mr.
If I can say to you that what's happening is well in terms of day-to-day expenditure.
Did somebody pass you a piece of paper? What is our deficit at the moment?
Not at all.
How much money are you going to raise from cutting winter fuel payments?
Well, it depends where we set the level.
No,
we said we'll consult on that. We know it costs
roughly
about $2 billion.
Most of that $2 billion?
We'll see, because we haven't, as you know, set the level
Exactly,
of
it is an uncosted black hole document.
Is it a waste of time for me to ask you how you're going to pay for something that's worth 40 billion?
Well, I'd be patient, Andrew. Just a couple of more days to go.
But where will the money come from?
Well, it'll be a priority area for us, so we will find that money.
But so you haven't been able to show us a revenue line where this 8 billion will come from.
Now, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, or IFS, has analysed Labour and Conservative manifestos and compared their plans on public spending, the public finances and reforms to taxes and benefits. I'm pleased to say, to discuss their findings, Carl Emerson, their Deputy Director, is here with me now. Welcome to the show. Now, the parties tell us that their policies are all fully costed and transparent, aren't they?
No, they take risks. Labour has a plan to increase public spending considerably. They would keep the deficit around its current level, so borrow a lot more than the Conservatives, and they would raise taxes significantly. Now, they think their tax raises would get them about £49 billion. We agree that they'd get a lot of money from their tax policies, but we think even £41 billion would be optimistic in the medium term, and they'd get less in the longer run. So with Labour, there's a clear risk. What will you do if your tax raises don't get you the money that you expect? We don't think they would bring in the money they want. What would they do then? Would they spend less, perhaps rein back on those promises, or would they put some other tax up?
Right. Now, you say they're being optimistic in Labour's case. We'll come on to the Conservatives in just a moment. But to be fair, they have put some costings together, because presumably otherwise you wouldn't have been able to make your value judgments.
Indeed, we've been able to go through the numbers they've provided, and we've been able to see where they've gone for what we would describe as an optimistic rather than a central estimate. We can see where we think literally they have just made a mistake, and we can see where they will genuinely raise a lot of tax revenue, and that's why we're able to say, we think 41 billion rather than 49 would still be a bit on the optimistic side. Open question about what they would do if faced with that kind of shortfall. Now, you also say Labour's plans would bring taxes to their highest ever peacetime level. How do you come to that conclusion? So with an increase in the tax burden of about £41 billion, our numbers, not theirs, they actually think they'd do more. It would put tax as a share of our economy above the levels we saw in the early 80s, above the level we saw at the end of the 1960s. So it would be at its highest level since 1949-50. Now, so that's a very long while in a historical sense. If you compare it internationally, actually lots of advanced economies have much higher tax burdens than we do. So this would move us up to about mid-table in terms of tax as a share of our economy. It would move the UK to a kind of Canadian position rather than, say, a Scandinavian position. Right, and you say that Labour's public sector pay plans will cost £9 billion extra. How did you work that out? We've looked at how much we spend on public sector pay, included the pension contributions, included the national insurance contributions that go alongside that. Under the Conservative government, they would keep the 1% pay cap in place, which would clearly take a big risk with recruitment, retention of public sector workers. Under Labour, they would delegate it to the pay review bodies. If they recommend that pay goes up in line with private sector workers, which we think is a reasonable neutral assumption, you would be able to mitigate a lot of those risks about recruitment and retention, but it would mean public sector employers faced with a 9 billion rise in their pay bills.
But, as we said earlier in the programme, you commented that this is a retail offer being made by Labour. Whether you believe the figures or not, is it appealing?
It's about mood music, isn't it? In terms of, you know, how the electorate look at these things. You know, you're looking at Theresa May's manifesto, which may be brutally honest. It might just be fiscally upfront about, look, we haven't got any money, so we can't spend it. We've got to relook at social care. Even if you don't like how we're doing it, we will be putting more money into it. We're beginning the process. Labour, but we're not giving you anything above that, a few school meals here and there. Labour have got this big old list, which, by the way, doesn't include, I think I'm right in saying, the cost of renationalisation. That isn't in their spending plans, which would be like a sort of mini Brexit for every industry you try to renationalise.
Yes, what do you make of the fact that there weren't detailed costings for renationalisation?
Well, there aren't. It's correct to say there aren't. They've said that they would nationalise the Royal Mail. They would have public sector companies operating in every region in
this
water,
would be like a mini
railway,
Brexit for every single one of them.
That would all add to public sector debt.
Enormous costs.
Figures? Do you have any ballpark
We don't have figures on that.
Would you be able to estimate what the figures would be broadly?
No, because we have no sense of the scale or the timing of this.
Right.
We do know it would mean they'd be on course to miss their fiscal target, though.
Right, because of course they have promised to balance the books on current day-to-day spending. Now, let's look at the Tories. Because you say the Tories will cut £11 billion from benefits, reducing the incomes of the lowest income working age households significantly. Is that in the manifesto?
It's a continuation of current government policy, so it's not in the manifesto. There's no, in fact, so whoever's the next Chancellor, if they choose to change nothing, you would see £11 billion worth of working age benefit cuts roll through the system. As, for example, universal credit gets rolled out, it's much less generous than the system it's replacing.
So it was a glaring omission?
It was not being fully honest about what the implications of a Conservative government would be.
I mean, that's a big amount of money, which, of course, it's not in the manifesto. The Conservatives can argue that it is continuing government policy, but £11 billion being cut from benefits will very much hit working-age households.
It will, and it will be felt by a lot of people, and a lot of people who are in seats that are either currently held by Conservative MPs or that MPs are intending to win, and those MPs will suddenly find themselves putting in a need to put a lot of pressure on a Conservative government, if indeed the Conservatives win, to say, hang on, you can't do this to my constituents. And I don't think the Conservative Party has been honest with itself about that. And part of that is the underlying problem here is that you had 5 years during which the Conservative Party under David Cameron and George Osborne organised the entire political argument very effectively around the need to deal with the deficit and the debt, and that this was the overarching kind of priority in all the politics. And then suddenly they've completely gone. Brexit is the issue. Theresa May's the Prime Minister. She's inherited that agenda, but not the political will to make that the central argument in British politics. And she's not making that case. And actually, that case is now feeling a little bit stale and old. And I don't think Theresa May has properly grappled with that change.
Right, well, let's talk about one of the big issues that Theresa May and all the politicians have focused on to some extent, and that is immigration. And Mrs May's plan, she's obviously restated that pledge to some criticism, but you are saying that her plans to reduce immigration to the tens of thousands will hit both the economy and the public finances. How can you work that out?
Well, we know from the government's own forecasts that when, in November, it revised down what it thought net immigration would be over the next few years, it revised down tax receipts 4 years out by about £6 billion. So we've seen that already in the books. That was a revision down to about 180,000 a year net immigration. If you want to take it down by another 80,000, get it close to tens of thousands a year, that's going to hit you for about £6 billion a year in 4 years' time, and that number will actually grow over time. The more years you hit that target, the more it will hit the public funds.
Is that a price worth paying, Ian?
I think probably from an electoral perspective, I think absolutely it is for the Conservatives, because they will look at that.
Immigration still topping the economy.
This is incredibly popular. Most polls suggest people would like to bring it down, measured, not get rid of it, but just control it.
But how do you explain then the low tax receipts? I mean, if the tax receipts go down that dramatically, if you take
they only go down because you're suggesting jobs will go as a result of immigrants not being here. Well, wouldn't they just simply be replaced by people who currently are looking for a job? Are we seriously suggesting that Costa and Cafe Nero will be suddenly empty and barren and tumbleweed going through them because nobody wants to work as a barista?
We seriously are suggesting that if there are more working age people coming to Britain wanting to work, there'll be more people employed in this country. And actually there isn't a fixed number of jobs in the economy, and if we have people who want to come here and want to work and we decide we don't want them here, that's a cost.
So jobs get created because they're here, or while they're here, they take jobs that are currently available.
Yes, but of course they would argue, I suppose, that employment levels are quite high at the moment.
Well, at the moment, we've got record employment, haven't
right.
we?
So there aren't that many. Well, there aren't that many people looking to perhaps take some of the jobs that will become available.
But I think there would be enough. I just can't imagine that our economy would collapse, and coffee bars and that hospitality area, which is obviously an industry that does attract lots of people who are coming in from Europe, for example, they're not going to just suddenly close down, are they?
Right. Is this the IFS just predicting doom and gloom? And, you know, what I mean, forecasts are marvellous to some extent, but most people would say it's not scientific enough to actually become true.
Well, there's certainly huge amounts of uncertainty. We can plan on the basis of the best forecasts we've got. That doesn't mean the world is going to turn out exactly as we predict. Things could be better, things could be worse. I mean, there are certainly lots of risks in these proposals. I think with the Conservatives' manifesto, the biggest risk perhaps is the fact that when you look at their NHS spending plans, when you look at their school spending plans, they're really not that generous. And what we don't know is whether, you know, if it is the case that that leads to a deterioration in the quality of those public services, would they end up having to top those plans up, or would we just live with public services that were less good?
But is this based on your idea that Brexit is going to provide uncertainty rather than opportunity?
It's based on the government's own forecast for the economy over the next 5 years from the Office for Budget Responsibility that they produced in March. So it's the government's own estimates.
Just finally, it is true, isn't it, that if we don't have a strong economy, if tax receipts go down, then neither government will be able, potential government will be able to fulfil their plans?
Yes, absolutely. The most important line in the Conservative manifesto is the one that says we will leave the single market and the customs union. They haven't explained how you do that in a way that preserves the stable growing economy that we happen to have at the moment. And if you don't have an explanation for that, the rest of the numbers, the rest of the forecasts, what you're planning to do, could go either way. It's practically
You can't fit that in a manifesto, though, can you?
Yes, right. But that is the line that will determine the most about what happens to this country, and the rest of the manifesto is completely hypothetical on whether they can actually do that in a way that protects the economy.
Do you think there is more of a focus on public services now, which has played into Jeremy Corbyn's?
Yeah, I think there has. Again, it's about mood music, and that poll has closed for a reason. The one we've seen today, as we said, it's only one, but it's closed for a reason. Mood music, he's giving you loads. The Tories suggesting they're being more prudent, I suppose.
All right, we'll have to end it there, columnist, and thank you very much.
I've been getting away with